Hello again and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm your host Kim Todd and we're happy you could join us for another hour of good gardening. We've got another great show planned for you, but first let's introduce tonight's panel from Nebraska Extension. We have bug guy Jonathan Larson.
Howdy, howdy.
Critter creature Dennis Ferraro, so don't be calling in
Great
with
to be
turf
here.
questions. Amy Timmerman down from O'Neill, Rots and Spots.
Hi, Kim.
And Elizabeth Killinger sitting in the horticulture chair.
Great to be here.
You know, getting your gardening questions answered is easy. You just dial 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 800-676-5446. Emails and pictures for future shows can be sent to byf@unl.edu. When you send those to us, please attach those pictures as JPEGs. Give us as much information as you can, including where you live. We promise not to stalk. You can also follow Backyard Farmer during the week on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, and Pinterest. Before we get to questions, let's look at samples. And Jonathan, I don't believe anybody has ever actually brought this in.
It's because it's a little messy to be bringing on the road.
Well, and a little bit.
We've got two webworm examples here. So we've got mimosa webworm in this hand, and this is fall webworm over here, the little bit taller one. Mimosa webworm, they live in mimosas and thornless honey locust trees. They like all the little leaves in those locust trees, and they'll gobble them up inside of those webs. You can control them with spinosad or BT when they're smaller, but once they get to be about this size, you should do what I did, which is tear it out of the tree and then destroy it in some fashion. And this is the fall webworm over here, and they make this tint over the tips of branches, and then they sort of expand and build over those as they grow, and they defoliate the leaves. And they're gregarious, they feed together. They're like a big happy family when they're feeding in there until they get bigger. And if you want to get rid of them, you can prune them out. You can blow them out with a hose or do the cotton candy method. You stick a stick in there and twirl it around and yank it out. Or you can do some insecticides, but usually you don't have to go that route. Just don't use fire. I get a lot of questions about that. Never use fire to control either of these pests, please.
For heaven's sakes, I would never think of that one. All right, Dennis, it's probably a good thing Terry James or Lauren is not anywhere near you.
Yeah, actually, I brought it in because Lauren I thought would be here, and he doesn't like small snakes. He doesn't like big snakes either. But this is a full-grown female DeKay's brown snake. And actually, she gives live birth, and she gave live birth about 2 weeks ago to little tiny snakes. But I'm getting a lot of calls about this little snake. It's found in the eastern half of the state. And they eat slugs and snails. See that small head? That small head is so it goes right inside the snail shell, and they can pull out the snail. So you find them around, they're great. If you have hostas, they'll take care of those small snails, those slugs for you and the small snails. And they don't cause any harm, don't carry any germs and viruses. They will musk on you, as you can see that liquid on my finger. So they love to get a little smell on you, but that's about it.
DeKay's brown.
DeKay's brown snake.
All right,
after
excellent.
famous herpetologist DeKay.
Okay, excellent.
With a K,
Thanks for
not a
bringing
C.
her in.
Yeah.
Okay, Amy, tomato rotty time.
Tomato rotty time. Well, it's that time of year. We're starting to get lots of questions about tomatoes. And so one of the questions I've been getting is, I have yellow speckling on my tomato fruits. You can kind of see it here. Is it tomato spotted wilt? Is it a virus? Can I eat it? So on and so forth. And this tomato was actually picked, you can see that yellow speckling on there. This was actually picked out of the Backyard Farmer garden. The plant is not infected with a virus. This is actually what we call cloudy spot. It's caused by stink bugs that are actually penetrating and trying to find a feeding site, and stink bugs don't actually like tomatoes. So they'll just keep probing along, and because of it, they will leave these cloudy locations in lighter pink to yellow discoloration on the tomato fruit. So perfectly fine and healthy to eat. The other question we occasionally get is, I have this tomato here. So we got nice big long green stripes on it. Is it a virus? Is it healthy? Is it okay? And this is actually okay. This is green zebra. This is the way the tomato fruit is supposed to look like. So if you would have accidentally had the tag switched in your pots at the greenhouse and all of a sudden you're having this, you may be really concerned. But this is very typical for this variety. If it's a virus, typically we don't see that speckling and spotting when the tomato fruit is still green. So healthy tomato fruits and actually stink bugs, so instead of viruses.
Excellent. So we always like to have people know what they have before they use the wrong pesticide or insecticide or any side on it. All right, Elizabeth, a favorite plant out of our backyard farmer garden.
Another plant out of the backyard farmer garden. This one is a fun one. It's Malabar spinach, and it's not a true spinach like what we think of in the garden where we just pick the leaves. But what this is it's a vine. And so it's really fun. It makes these big leaves on it that are edible, and it has these nice purple vines to it, and then it flowers. And so I did some research on it, and it's an annual for our area. It'll do that full sun to part shade. If it's in part shade, you're gonna have bigger leaves, so if that's something that you want to do. The blooms can actually affect the flavor as it does in other edible plants, but it's so pretty that we were talking about earlier, we'd plant this over the hyacinth bean any day because it gives you that color, it gives you that red appearance, you got some bloom on it, and you can eat it too. So it's one of those that multiple seasons, multiple uses for it.
Wonderful. And I don't think any insects have attacked ours.
There's
At least
not a
not
whole
much.
lot of damage out there, and it is very tasty. I had some earlier.
All right, excellent. Thanks all. Jonathan, you get the very first picture question tonight.
I'm ready.
Okay. This is a person who took this nice picture of that beautiful little insect. He thinks it's a leafhopper, and his concern was whether it is responsible for aster yellows.
Okay.
So what is it, and what does it do?
Right on. This is the candy-striped leafhopper. It gets its name because of that green and sort of red coloration that you see there. It is sometimes a pest. It's closely related to the cicada, so it has the same shaped head and a needle-like mouth part. They do suck out plant juices, so they can cause leaf cupping or discoloration of leaves, but they don't spread the disease aster yellows. That's a different leafhopper. So you don't need to worry about this one. If you've got lots of this one, you can blow them off with a hose, or you can try to use row covers, but really not an insect that we have to deal with in terms of pesticides or anything like that.
Candy stripe.
Candy stripe.
I like
Looks
it.
kind of like a Dr. Seuss insect or something.
All right, Dennis, this is an interesting one. This is from Missouri.
Okay.
They had a raccoon that was living under the porch, and I think our viewers can see on the picture there, we have kind of a porch, and you have all that soil
Yeah.
kind of wadded up against the house. And some rabbits and some other things under the porch. Her question was that they get fleas, but the real question is, how do you keep critters from doing that burrowing? They think they get fleas from those, which is a Jonathan question, but how do you keep them out of the...
Yeah, to keep them out, that's a cement porch. And so where that cement ends and meets the ground, you want to pack in there probably about, a foot wide, but by a foot deep, of something like road gravel or lava rock, and then put about 5 or 6 inches of soil on top of it. So you can grow any kind of vegetation on top of that. But if they try to dig into that lava rock or packed gravel, it will discourage them from going underneath there. When it comes to the fleas, yes, rabbits and raccoons have fleas, but we found across the Midwest, almost all the raccoons and rabbits have cat fleas. So they're tropical cat fleas coming from our pests that are on these wild animals. And if they're still getting bit in that area, coming out of the front door, even though the animals are gone and all the vegetation's gone, I would look for something other than fleas. It might be, I don't know, maybe something fallen from the tree. I couldn't tell what type of tree that was. It could be, we can ask Jonathan, a lace bug or?
Lace bug, minute pirate bug, they
minute-
sometimes poke people.
Right.
Chiggers
Right,
are always a
yeah.
possibility.
Because once the vegetation's gone and the animal's gone, the chances of having fleas are extremely low.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Dennis. All right, Amy, catalpas.
Okay.
These viewers are from Hendley, near Hendley, Nebraska. About 4 years old, grown from seed. They have damage, shows up in July or August. They have had some dry weather. They do water, perhaps not enough is the question.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what's going on with these, and I know that we tried to answer this last week without pictures.
Without the pictures.
Yeah.
And I know without the pictures last week, Kevin was saying maybe it was verticillium wilt, and that is one of the few diseases that we see affecting catalpa. But with the pictures you've provided, the symptoms aren't matching up with verticillium wilt. So at this point in time, I'm leaning against verticillium wilt, but I'm uncertain on what it is. The photos really put a big question mark there for me. So I would actually start leaning more toward maybe an environmental thing, maybe not watering enough. But in all reality, to get to the bottom of that question, a sample needs to be cut and submitted to the local extension office and then to the plant pest diagnostic clinic for Kevin to get a really good look to see if it is verticillium, if there's anything growing in that stem, or if there's another fungal pathogen on those leaves, or if it's just environmental. Much better off going that way than making any assumptions or guesses at this point in time, especially with it being such a young tree. And if there's something we can do to prevent the death of it, we definitely want to do that.
All right, thanks, Amy. Elizabeth, this is a papillion viewer. She has endless summer hydrangeas, part shade. Haven't really bloomed for a couple years, except for one of them had a couple. She did do some pruning last year, and then she didn't prune at all, but she still is not getting what she would expect out of what we sometimes refer to as endless bummer.
Endless bummer. And that's one of the ones that a lot of people want, because you can have pink blooms or you can have blue blooms, and it blooms on old wood, it blooms on new wood. It's the best hydrangea in the world. But the kicker is hydrangeas sometimes are pretty touchy where they want to go. They like that moist environment, they like the rich soils. You really want to try to avoid pruning until we know how much death and dieback there is due to winter. You don't want to prune them in the fall, and then if we have a hard winter, you can have some dieback on top of that. Also, we can see some issues. Winter can play a big role. If we have a super cold winter or a really open winter, if they're not mulched, we can see a lot of death and dieback on them too. So, I mean, it's one of those where, you know, maybe give it a little bit more water, try to keep it in a moist environment. Try not to prune it till next spring and just wait and see what happens with that one.
And pick out some of the other ones that are going to bloom.
Yeah, pick out some of the other fun ones too.
All right. Well, a beautiful pond doesn't just happen overnight. It takes time to plan, to figure out the original idea, to do the construction, and of course to get the plants established and Dennis's turtles in there. For our first feature tonight, Jason Heller of Neptune's Water Gardens talks to us about what it takes to build and manage a fantastic water feature.
A water feature can be a great addition to the landscape. Designing a water feature so it looks like it's always been here and the rest of the landscape developed around it is important so it doesn't seem like it's out of place. Using native plants, native stone features, native wood items that we found here on site, we're able to bring the water feature into the rest of the landscape and make it appear that it has always been here. The waterfalls and stream cascade down the hillside in two separate waterfalls leading from our biological filter, which is all plant filtered using plant material and the roots. The plants will take up the nitrogen, and through the nitrification process with bacteria, they'll filter the water, helping to keep it clear as it moves down into the stream to provide a clear pool for the koi fish to swim through and for the homeowners to enjoy. Mechanical skimmers are an essential tool in the maintenance and upkeep of this water feature. The skimmer acts as a pump housing and sweeps debris off the surface into a basket that can be easily removed and dumped out to take care of the maintenance. The skimmer also houses our ionizer probe that helps cut down on the amount of string algae that can accumulate in a pond in full sun, such as this one. Aquatic plants are an essential part of the maintenance and upkeep of this pond. They act as our kidneys, filtering out the water, taking up all the nutrients from the fish waste. They act as shade and cover on the pond to protect the fish from the sun and from potential predators that could fly in. Plants such as this graceful cattail act as a great filtering plant. The water runs through the roots, and the roots draw up all that nitrogen and help remove it from the pond, so it's not feeding the algae that we don't want, and it's feeding the plants that we do. We select a smaller variety of cattail like this graceful cattail rather than the native common cattail because common cattail tends to be very aggressive. Water lilies are a beautiful jewel in the water garden. Their flowers rest on the surface, the round pads just kind of echo the ripples that can spread across the water. They're pads provide a nice screening for the fish as they swim in between. It provides a resting place for frogs and turtles. Just a variety of colors. Most of the water lilies in this pond are hardy water lilies, meaning they'll come back year after year after year in a variety of colors, and they just bring true beauty to the water garden. The lotus is another beautiful jewel in our water garden. The lotus grows very similar to the water lily, with its pads floating on the surface initially, and then they rise up out of the water and get these large flowers that come in a variety of pinks and yellows and whites. This water feature is a beautiful dynamic piece to this landscape. It's always changing season to season. The soothing sounds of the waterfall provide an excellent place to relax at the end of the day.
Of course, your pond doesn't have to be as elaborate or even as big as the one we just saw, but any pond or water feature can really bring that measure of relaxation and peace to that outdoor living space and all those creatures.
Yeah.
All those creatures and insects, and very, very cool stuff. All right, Jonathan.
Amongst the butterflies.
Butterflies. Yeah, they can puddle in the pond.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, so your second two pictures are
Twofer.
a twofer. Yep. The first is really bad potato damage near Plattsmouth. He said that he found many large white grubs, some even in the holes. He thinks they were the source. Wonders what he can do next year without contaminating the edibility of the crop.
Right on.
That's the first one. The second one is some beets that don't look very edible either.
No.
This year's been challenging, and these are in Council Bluffs, and they had roly-polies all over.
Yeah.
So they didn't know if the rollies were doing the poly or
okay.
what was happening.
So in our first one in the potatoes, definitely white grub damage, our normal scarab kind of grubs that usually are in the lawn feeding on roots. But if I were offered lawn roots or potato roots, I would obviously choose the potatoes as well. So they're in there burrowing through them and eating on those. Next year, you may want to try some crop rotation. You could put something different in there like legumes, and that will make sure that the grubs aren't interested in that area. They can't survive in that area. The other option would be to deep rototill this fall to expose the grubs to the elements and to predators. And then hopefully you won't deal with them next year. As for the beet question, I see a lot of black, mushy kind of stuff there, and usually we don't associate roly-polies or pill bugs or wood lice or whatever you want to call them with that sort of feeding on plants. They usually take advantage of already rotten situations. So I would say these beets suffered some sort of other tragedy, overwatering or cracking, and the roly-polies, these land crustaceans, are just sort of taking advantage of your already harmed beets. So no need to control them, just something that's out there sort of taking advantage of a bad situation.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, Dennis. Let's see, I'm not sure where she is from, but she sent a what is it picture of a lovely little green something.
That is Hyla chrysosceles, which is the green tree frog. And, and about them, they're all over eastern part of the state, and actually they're migrating across the state. And we find them all over. Sometimes we find them there. They can get anywhere they want. And they're actually as far west as North Platte now. And so they're following the Platte River migration corridor of trees. They don't cause any problems. They don't have salmonellosis or salmonella. And they don't even have poison glands on them like some toads. And they're just our only gray tree frog, but they can be lime green if they want to be. And the amazing part about them, they stay under the bark in free solid every winter, cryogenics in its purest form, and come back to life in the spring.
How cool is that?
40% of their body turns to ice.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. So viewers, if the frog would have done what the frog did before we went on camera, the frog would have been right smack on Dennis's forehead. But clearly he doesn't have quite as much control over the natural world as he would like to. All right, thanks, Dennis. Amy, back to you, and this is crab apples.
Okay.
The first is, she said, and this is from Lexington/Cozad area, she said one tree completely died within 30 to 45 days. She hadn't ever seen fire blight, so she wasn't sure, but you know, the kind of the classic symptoms on it. And then the second one, of course, is our usual yellow
Yellow leaf.
spotties this time of year.
We'll start off with the first picture that's up on the screen. Nothing as exciting as the frog on my forehead or anything, but this is classical fire blight. 2 wet springs has been notorious for fire blight. It's a bacterial disease. It comes in through the flowers with the honeybees. And then it sits there and it plugs up that vascular system that moves all that water, nutrients in that plant and keeps working its way down. And with all that bacteria, it's plugging it up. And so no water and nutrients are able to move and that branch slowly dies. What can we do for it at this point in time? You can attempt to prune out those areas. But with a pruning of a fire blight, we're going to be looking at anywhere from 8 to 12 inches below what we see as evidence of fire blight. So whether it's a sunken in canker or the dead tissue or dead branch. And then between every cut, we need to dip those pruners or those saws into either a Clorox, a bleach solution, or use some isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol to kill the bacteria so we don't move it to another spot. The second picture is the classical yellow leaves of crab apples this time of year. That is classical apple scab moving on. As the disease progresses, it stresses the tree defoliates prematurely. As I was walking around campus 4 or 5 years ago, I knew exactly where those trees were at, and slowly landscape management has removed those trees on me, so I couldn't find a really good sample of apple scab anymore on campus. This is what happens when you move away for a couple of years. What are we gonna do? We're gonna do a fungicide application as those leaves are emerging next spring. Otherwise, if it's a major issue, as Landscape Services is doing on campus, we remove those trees and replace it with a crabapple variety that is resistant, and then we don't have to worry about any fungicide applications.
All right, thanks, Amy. Elizabeth, this is a Lincoln viewer, and she has a green pond. She doesn't know what this is, and she doesn't know what to do about this.
What it is it's probably a little aquatic weed called duckweed. And what it has 2 fun little leaves on it, and it just floats on the surface. A small duckweed population is okay. Once it covers the entire surface of the lake, then we could be looking at some issues with the pond itself. There are some aquatic grade herbicides that can be used to help with duckweed. However, I don't think they're available for homeowner use. And so that's going to be the kicker there. She can take a net out there and scoop it off if you want to, or I'll do it for $5 every scoop. Job security, because it can be an ongoing issue with that. But that's duckweed. You might want to take a look to see if there is somebody that could possibly come and spray early in the season to keep the duckweed under control before it covers the entire surface of that lake or pond.
And if it doesn't look like little bitty plants, it might be blue-green algae.
It could be,
then we
yep.
call DEQ.
Yeah, then we call DEQ, but more than likely I'm leaning more toward the duckweed on the top of the surface.
I found out in my ponds, if I got duckweed, I put an aerator in there because
Right.
duckweed hates agitation.
Right.
So if you just put something spitting in the middle, like a statue of you spitting water.
That would be really lovely.
And do some fish eat some of the duckweed or not so much?
Not too much.
Yeah,
Oh,
All
getting fish
No
not's going to help.
biocontrol.
there you go. Put the aerator in there and enjoy.
There we go.
All right, well, you know, we had another wonderful, fun open house this weekend out in our garden. So as our season winds down, Terry James says it's really a great time to get your fall garden plans not only off the ground, but in the ground. Let's take a minute to visit the Backyard Farmer Garden.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we are going to first thank everyone that came out for our open house this last Saturday. Had a great turnout, and we enjoyed talking to all of our fans that were able to see our garden. It is looking fantastic. We're doing a little more inventory this week. We're pulling out some of the stuff that doesn't really look very good, or that's kind of really seen as better days. And we're really going to get started on our fall planting. We've pulled out those seeds, and we're looking at the dates. We also have to remember when our frost dates are for here in Nebraska. In eastern Nebraska, it's about October 10th. For western Nebraska, it's about September 30th. So what we need to do is we need to look at that seed packet and see how many days it is to harvest, and then count back from there. So the 1st of August, middle of August, depending on when it is about the time to start planting your fall garden. We have a couple peas that are only going to be a 55-day to harvest, and those are going to be going in some of our raised beds. We're also going to be able to extend our garden by putting some hoops over our raised beds so we can actually move that into October and November and hopefully have some greens for Thanksgiving. So stop on by the Backyard Farmer Garden. That's what's happening this week.
We have just had a banner year in our garden this year, and harvest has started. We have a lot of things to eat out there. Some of the fall ornamentals are also starting to really look beautiful. So next year, who knows? We might have broken the mold on this one. We'll see. All right, Jonathan, we have a question from Lincoln.
Okay.
10-year-old ash. Some of the branches have brown growths.
Okay.
And they say it looks like burnt popcorn.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good.
Pretty accurate, yeah.
Hasn't seen the insect activity. The neighbor has said it's ash gall.
Okay, yeah. So what we're dealing with here is definitely the ash flower gall mite. This is a mite that it's very tiny. It's called an areophyid mite, and they live inside of the flower and they create that gall. It looks like the world's most boringest firework or brown pom-pom kind of, and they don't really damage the tree, nothing you have to worry about. You can try to prune some of them out if you want, or you could get an injection, but really not an issue for the tree. It's just a cosmetic sort of nature's wondrous pageantry.
All right, and don't eat it. It's not really popcorn.
Yeah, it's not cauliflower.
Okay, Dennis, this is a viewer that has a woodchuck in their rock garden, apparently have a lot of boulders. And when and how does he or she get rid of him or her?
You don't have to worry about the woodchuck chucking the rocks, for one, if he is in the rock garden. But probably the best way to do it is to cage or live trap them. And you should use a trap that's opaque or put a piece of burlap over the trap. Wire it open with baling wire and put like cucumbers or zucchini in there and let them steal it for a while. And then unwire it and you'll catch them after a while. We call it pre-baiting for almost a week because they're so slow and they have a big furry butt. And so they start to go in the cage and it flips on them and they can back out. But when they're used to going in and out, and then you could, once they get caught in the trap, you could, just by being in the trap for a while, it's called hazing. And so you may release them almost on spot. And if you plug the hole with gravel, he or she probably will not come back to that same location. But you cannot use any poisons or toxicants on woodchucks in the state of Nebraska or in most of the Midwest.
All right, thanks, Dennis. Amy, this is an Omaha viewer, and she sent a picture. It was a bit blurry, so I have kind of a good description here. It is a sour cherry tree, almost 50 years old, and it's showing some very small but numerous sort of flattish white fruiting bodies and a couple of limbs up high.
Okay.
Any ideas?
Usually once we start seeing fruiting bodies on any tree, upper, lower, on the base of the trunk or on the branches, it's an indication that those branches are hollow in the inside. So we have some type of fungus inside that's been eating away at the inside of the heartwood. And it's now emerging out and it's going to start reproducing. And so it's an indication that the integrity of the tree is most likely declining associated with it. And a sour cherry tree that old is extremely old. So you'll probably want to look at pruning out those areas this fall, have an arborist come out and take a look at it and to determine how far that heart rot goes into the base of the tree to determine whether you can just remove part of it or you have to remove the entire sour cherry.
All right, thanks, Amy. Elizabeth, several acres of brome, even though you're not the turf person, around a lake in a housing development. This is Lincoln area. They want to replace the brome with native grasses. Any initial suggestions since you've battled that beast out in Grand Island?
I do battle the beast. When it comes to smooth brome is extremely aggressive. It'll spread by rhizomes below ground. So you think you might have it stopped, but then it's going to go beyond that location. So we're looking at a glyphosate-like product, Roundup, but we're looking at several recurrent applications to make sure that you kill what is there. And so that's where if they have a native prairie area, good luck having it surrounded by brome around the outside and not have the brome be introduced into that native prairie area. Prairie takes about 5 years to get established, and so by that time that brome is going to start to creep back in, and it's going to be an issue that way. But if you wanted to try that brome, we could, like I said, recurrent applications of that glyphosate product like Roundup. You could try the sterilization or solarization when you put that plastic over the top to try to cook it out. Clear plastic, it's going to have to stay there for quite a while. And like I said, be careful if you keep it around the margin of that area. But it's just going to be a game that you're going to have to play for quite a while, especially if you put that prairie there and it's going to take 5 years. So just keep after it.
You ready, Elizabeth?
Yep.
All right. A Platte County viewer wants to know about moving a fine-leafed or fern-leafed buckthorn. It's only a year old. When to do that and how?
You can do it in the spring. You have to do it very carefully. Make sure you know the mature or approximate mature size of the tree so you have enough space for it.
All right. Why are there no wild plums on the wild plums this year?
You know, I think it's because we had a wet spring and they just didn't get pollinated very well. I've seen wild plums and I've seen no wild plums, so it's all location too.
All right. We have an older, like a 35-year-old magnolia is yellowing. Any notion on what that might be? And it's in the Lincoln, Omaha area.
We could be looking at an environmental condition at this point in time. It could be getting hot. It could not have enough moisture, so environmental more than likely.
All right. Can tree roots be covered with soil a couple of inches deep and then turf planted all the way up to the trunk? Is that a good idea?
I'm going to say no, but I'm not the turf lady. That's going to compromise the air exchange of the roots, and then we can have issues down the road with the tree. And turf doesn't grow very well under trees anyway.
All right. Can you divide oak leaf hydrangeas?
No.
Excellent. You cannot. Thank you very much.
I would say if anybody's looking for plums, they need to come to my neck of the woods. You know, take a road trip and collect all the plums you want.
You had a lot of moisture this year. It was a good one.
We have a nice big plums.
Okay. Ready?
Yes. Okay.
This is a viewer in Weston. They have a giant shelf-like fungus 40 feet up in a branch of a tree. Is that tree on the toast list?
The tree is on the toast list. You have a heart rot in that tree.
All right.
Have an arborist come see you.
Brown streaking in potatoes, and not the brown thing in the middle, but like streaky spots. What is that?
Streaking spots in potatoes, there is a disease called zebra chip that is transmitted by a psyllid. Not real common. Some other insects can cause it. Also, sometimes if the potato grows too fast, we can get brown streaks.
All right. Can the foliage of peonies that have serious powdery mildew go into the compost pile?
Yes, they can go in the compost pile.
All right. Does verticillium wilt attack serviceberries? Have you ever seen that?
I have not seen it attack serviceberry, but I would not be surprised. Verticillium attacks 1 million plant species.
Okay. Whole shoots of blue junipers, kind of those Wichita blues, are dying, but there's no insects. Are there blights of junipers that would do that?
There is a tip blight on junipers that will go after it, so probably should cut off a sample. There's a couple of different ones on junipers that need to be identified underneath the scope to know fungicide timing.
All right, excellent, thanks. Dennis, you ready?
Ready as lunch meat, as Lauren would say.
Certain panelists saw an armadillo dead on the road by York. Were they like seeing things?
They weren't seeing things, but they probably, there's plenty of them on Interstate 80.
All right. How do you stop squirrels from chewing around new pruning cuts on an oak?
Very difficult. You almost have to fence it out. Plastic netting.
Okay. How high up will critters tunnel to get into a raised garden bed? Will they go up a couple feet? Or?
Oh, they'll go up many feet. Rabbits will jump 2 feet easy.
So how do you keep them?
Just put a fence on the edge of the bed.
All right. We have an elderly person who wants to get rid of a baby snake that's in her house. How does she do that?
Well, the best way to do that is use a cloth and wet cloth. Put the dry cloth over the wet cloth in a warm corner, and it should gravitate to that location, and just sweep it into a bucket and let it out.
All right. Are there an unusual number of toads or frogs this year? Seems like.
Yeah, we had a very wet time, and they need moisture to reproduce. So yes, the populations of most of them are high.
All right. Excellent. Nice job. Okay, Jonathan, up to you. Ready?
Ready.
Why are there so many daddy longlegs this year?
Lots of heat, lots of food, so there's going to be lots of daddy long legs.
All right. Are the orb weavers early? It seems like there's lots of orbs.
I wouldn't say that they're necessarily early, but maybe just more visible this year.
All right. The giant black wasp-like things, do they actually drive monarchs away from plants, or is it just too much activity?
They might scare the monarchs a little bit, but the monarchs will come back once they can see that there's no wasp there.
Okay. Why are praying mantises different colors? All sorts of different colors.
Different sexes, different species are going to be different colors.
Okay. The orange aphids are everywhere. Should people sacrifice the milkweeds or just turn their heads?
No, you could control those with a hort soap or something, or a strong blast of water. They'll fall off. They're
All
too
right.
dumb to get back up there.
Okay, so we say clean up the garden in the fall. That gets rid of the bad bugs, but what does that do for the good guys? Doesn't it get rid of them too?
Sometimes, but really, if they'll find other locations usually. The pests, they want to be close to your food sources. So the good bugs will be elsewhere.
Excellent. Nice job. Oh, we got through kind of a
Good job,
good wad of All right, Elizabeth, we have something that I'm not sure we've seen from Gladys before.
We have a very fun one. The one that Kim's talking to, I'm assuming, is the pineapple lily there, because it's a super fun one. What it is it's a tender bulb here in Nebraska, and the reason it gets its name is because it looks kind of like a pineapple with the little leaves on top, and then it covered with blooms all the way around. It originally comes from Africa, and it's a super fun one that, you know, like we said, it's a tender bulb that we don't see very often. The other one is one that we will see fairly regularly. It's perilla, also known as the beefsteak plant. And I just like some of the common names because one of the common names is Perilla magilla vanilla. And try to say that really fast, but that one's a little more green and white. This is probably Perilla magilla purple. Yeah, they used it all on the white one with the vanilla. But what it is it can get fairly large. It's a good foliage plant. It makes those greens really pop out. It can be fairly aggressive in some locations because it can seed very readily. The kicker with this one is it can be poisonous to cattle. So don't let the cattle graze on your Perilla magilla vanilla.
Excellent. And that is really a beautiful combination, as always. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks to Gladys. All right, next picture comes to you, Jonathan, and this is actually a couple of pictures from the same viewer.
Okay.
She has a worm poking its little head out of the top of that green tomato.
Yes.
And then she actually sent these other pictures in last week. She has some pretty rotten ones, and she's wondering if it is insects first, rot second, or what do we have going on here?
Yeah, so that's the tomato fruitworm that we saw in that first image, and their feeding does sort of cause issues like what we see there. So it's a hard pest to always diagnose because it comes in a lot of colors. Sometimes it's kind of a reddish pink, sometimes it's a yellowy green, sometimes it's brown with stripes like we see here. They start at the top, they go in, they create a soupy, watery mess in the tomato. They'll travel between tomatoes, and they can cause a lot of damage in all these different fruits that you're trying to grow. They're also the corn earworm. So they start in corn and then move in tomatoes to later in the year. So if you want to control them next year, spinosad or BT when the adults are flying, and that's usually when the silks on the corn have turned brown and dry. So apply that to your plants next summer and you hopefully won't deal with the tomato fruitworm.
Excellent, thank you very much. All right, Dennis, we have a viewer who has had all of their squash devoured. They thought they had it controlled with cayenne pepper, and then they found one devoured that was covered with cayenne pepper. They've seen squirrels in the squash, the cantaloupe, the zucchini. They already ate the peaches and the pears. What in the world?
It definitely looks like it could be squirrels. It could be a larger ground squirrel, or it could even be, the teeth mark doesn't look as big as a rabbit or a raccoon, so I'm going to go with the squirrels or ground squirrels. If you're putting the cayenne pepper in, you almost have to mix it with vegetable oil and paint it on so it lasts through a rain or a heavy dew, and that will help. You can also use netting around there so the animal gets caught up in the netting and then gets out and it gets discouraged from eating your fruit.
All right, thank you very much. More tomatoes.
More tomatoes.
Amy, this is a viewer that sent a picture and just said, what? Yeah, obviously the tomato I think is supposed to be yellow, but the spots are not.
I think it's decorative, but this is bacterial speck. Common bacterial disease that we see. The trick with speck, if you really look at the picture, the bumps are actually raised, and they're typically superficial, so you can take the back of your knife and scratch them right off, or your fingernail most of the time. You can eat it, even if you don't scratch it off, it won't hurt you one bit. Bacterial speck does not move to us. Usually we don't look at any management for it. If you've had a major issue, there are varieties out there that are resistant to bacterial speck.
All right, thank you, Amy. So last week we had corn smut. The same viewer now sent us pictures of alien corn. Elizabeth, this is twin corn. Normal corn is sweet and delicious, but what in the world do we have going on here?
I have seen a lot of multiple ear corn this year, and a lot of people are posting them on Facebook. But normally what happens with corn is there's several nodes and internodes, kind of like on a leaf, only it's on the shank or the end of the ear. And what happens normally is we have that apical dominance where we have that node at the top, or the main ear, and it stops the other ones from maturing. Well, sometimes what happens is we don't have that, and we don't have that apical dominance, and so it makes another shoot and another node. So there's several nodes on that shank that could potentially turn into different ears of corn. Nothing to worry about. It's just something that we see, nature's wondrous pageantry there, we'll throw that one out there. And so sometimes it's variety, sometimes it's weather conditions, sometimes it's just something that happens. But I saw one with up to 4 baby ears on there in addition to the main ear. So it's something we're seeing fairly readily this year.
Kind of fun this year.
It is, it is. It looks like a little hand out there in the cornfield.
Okay, well, you know, we've mentioned our hops research project a few times on past shows this season. University has installations of hops around the state. They're getting ready to harvest. We took some time to talk to one of the project's collaborators, Stacy Adams, to hear about how things have progressed and what plans we're making for doing the harvesting. In a previous segment for Backyard Farmer, we talked to Stacy Adams about a really interesting research project that the university is engaged in across the state. Here we are in August, our hops are up and growing, and we're going to give you a little bit more information about what we have actually discovered. Okay, Stacy, so now that we're actually into the first season of our research project, what do we think we're going to be able to tell both our commercial growers and our home brewers about what we've discovered?
Well, given it's Nebraska, we don't have any previous information on it. So what we've found so far is that some of the breeding work was mainly done in the northwest part of the United States. So we're hoping to identify, or we're looking at some varieties that are conducive to our environment. So that's what we're hoping, as well as our soils are different here, as well as timely rains and all that.
Our Backyard Farmer audience is asking us questions about how you actually grow the hops. They want to know things like cultural practices, trellising, what we're seeing in terms of insects and pests that they could manage in their own home or small farm landscape. Can we give them that advice yet, or are we still working on that?
So one of the goals of this project was to look at how to cultivate hops in Nebraska, given our soils are different, so water management and nutrition. So we're gathering that information. As well as insects and diseases that we potentially have. Another thing we need to be concerned of is management of the rhizomes. This is a woodlands plant that wants to get quite aggressive, so we have to learn how to manage the underground rhizomes as well as the top of the canopy.
Okay, it looks like these are beautiful and actually ready to harvest. How do our home brewers and our commercial people know that it is time to get the hops hopping off the vines?
So we're really getting close to harvest. One of the things a grower needs to do is probably not have all one variety, because the plants will all come in to harvest at about the same time. So a good manager or a grower will have a couple different varieties to spread that over, because the harvest window is somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks on all the different types of varieties. We're really close right now because it's got a straw flower type feel, where when you squeeze them, they kind of spring right back. And they're not quite ready when you squeeze them, and then they're like a sponge where they slowly come back into place. What we want is the setting of the chemistry, the lupulin, and we know we're right on when they get to that straw flower feel.
And then I'm assuming that the window for getting them harvested and getting them actually into the processing plant is pretty small, pretty short. One of those classic crop sorts of things where you don't have a whole lot of time or the quality of the product goes downhill. Is that correct? And what has to happen?
So once we've identified that we're needing to harvest the plant, you're basically like almost cutting grass. We're going to take the whole plant down from the ground to the top. And people have to remember this is a food crop, so we don't want to be dragging it around on the ground. So some people lay tarps on. Commercially, the machine, they take it right into the machine and then they harvest the cones. Keeping in mind, unlike agronomic crops where the moisture content is way down, on this particular plant, we're harvesting somewhere between the 70 and 80% moisture content. So we don't have a lot of time to deal with the cones. The cones need to be starting the drying process within about a 2-hour period. So that's something we need to watch for.
Okay, Stacy, we're looking forward to the conclusion of this project in 3 years and getting these hops into the Pilsners where they belong. You know, this has really been a fun project, and we're going to continue to give you reports on our winter program. Of course, that final test is always what goes into the Pilsner. So we'll get to that one, maybe not on air, but we'll report back. All right, Jonathan, picture for you. This is, let's see, he's in Norfolk. Found him on his pepper plants, wonders whether he should squish him.
This is the squash vine borer, so it's not going to harm your pepper plant. It's a little interesting looking moth. It's a daytime flying moth, unlike a lot of its cousins, and it's sort of that red and silver color as you see there. I think it looks like an Ohio State Buckeyes fan because of its coloration. Not going to harm your pepper plant. If you've got squash plants, though, you may want to be a little worried because they're one of our big pests of those plants. At this point in the year, you would have to probably perform squash vine surgery and slice that vine open, peel it open, pull the caterpillar out, squish it, get your revenge, seal it back together, and bury that portion of the vine and hope that it takes back over.
Or go to farmer's market and buy whatever you were after.
Yeah, there you go.
That's way easier. All right, Dennis, it's critters eating the fruit now. This is one who says something is eating her cantaloupe, and or honeydew or both, and that is the amount of the hole it is leaving.
That's a good sized hole, so it's bigger than a vole. Probably a squirrel or a good sized ground squirrel, and they're after the seeds on the inside. I'm sure they're taking some of the flesh by the incisor marks. It's definitely something that's good size. It's not rabbit incisors, so I would say a squirrel would be number one, and a ground squirrel would be number two for a pest. Both of them, you know, the netting goes a long way to stop them from getting the fruit, and all you have to do is lift the netting up to get the fruit. And, you know, as long as you just tie that netting down to the ground, they won't go underneath it.
All right, thanks, Dennis. Amy, this is Ponca Hills area, and they wonder what this is growing on a tree stump, and is it edible?
It is not edible. It's one of the shelf fungi that we have. There's multiple out there. All it's sitting there doing is decaying down that old stump. And so it's a good guy and it's reproducing, but this is not one that we will recommend to eat.
All right.
Just enjoy it.
Without tasting.
Without tasting.
All right, Elizabeth, question for you. This is a Elkhorn viewer. Planted butternut squash last year. One was a rogue, he thought. 3 examples of different, and then a regular one. And do we have any idea what he might have here? Are there other varieties, or we just have a little bit of cross-pollination going on?
If they save the seed, we can see some cross-pollination issues. There is a green butternut squash, I believe it's called Melissa. And so there is one out there. So if we cut it open, it has the flavor of the butternut. We could be looking at that variety out there. But like I said, if he saved the seeds for the following year, then we could be looking at a cross-pollination issue. The way to tell if those winter squash are ripe is if you put your thumbnail and it does not puncture the skin, then it's ripe. If you go to put your thumbnail on that skin and it punctures it, it's not ripe, and so you want to leave it on there just a little bit longer.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. It's always fun to see what comes up in the compost pile. All right, we have a couple of announcements. The first being the Greater Omaha Iris Society sale, Friday, August 19th, 2 to 8. Number on the screen for that, for people who are interested in that. And of course, we are going to be at the fair August 31st, meeting the panel 1:30ish, taping at 4 to air that show the following evening. So come give us your all and we will give it right back. All right, Jonathan, we have some questions here, one being paper wasps.
Oh, okay.
So, and this apparently is at the apex of the roof. Is one of those 15-foot sprays best, or what do you recommend on that one?
I mean, if it's that high up and nobody's really spending a lot of time up there, you could always just leave it there. These are beneficial insects. They control a lot of pests. They chop up pest caterpillars and spiders. So if they're not bothering anybody, I wouldn't go ahead and spray it. But if it's somewhere where like people poke their head out the window or you spend a lot of time on your roof, yeah, one of those aerosol sprays that are going to go 20 to 30 feet at dusk. Wear long sleeves just in case they come down to get you. But yeah, that would be the best control strategy.
All right, excellent. Dennis, a comment and then a question. We had a viewer who said goldfish eat duckweed, and he actually raises duckweed for his goldfish. Or I guess that's for Elizabeth or you.
So those would not be native.
Oh, there we go.
Uh-oh.
Keep the natives away from our state.
All right, and your question is, this is an Adams County viewer, barn swallows are nesting over the doors. How can you keep them from doing
Legally, by the 1974 Migratory Bird Act, you cannot touch that nest once it's completed and they're using it. But they should be leaving within about 3 or 4 weeks, the barn swallows. Then you can remove the nest, and then you can put some netting there, just let it hang so next year they don't have it, put it there. Or you can get what's called porcupine wire or Nexalite or something like that, and just put it right over the light or right over the door, and they will have a difficult time putting their mud nest there, and they won't put one there next year. But because they're a Migratory Bird Act, you cannot remove the nest as long as they're using it.
All right, thanks, Dennis. Amy, a North Platte viewer, apparently has crabapples with fire blight. Wonders whether the wood itself can be used for firewood and grilling, or will it cause problems in terms of spread?
You can use it as much as you want. It's not going to spread one bit, and it shouldn't affect the flavor of your food or your s'mores.
Nothing like good apple chips. All right, Elizabeth, button bushes. We have people who really like the button bush, but they don't like the fact that it gets 15 feet across. What can we offer them as a potential smaller version?
The smaller version, I believe, in the backyard farmer garden, they have Sputnik. I just like to say that. That was really fun. And then there's a newer one, Sugar Shack is a newer one that's supposed to stay fairly small. I know the ones out at State Fair, they just die back naturally, so ours stay fairly small, but you can prune them back fairly severely to keep that size small. But try one of those smaller varieties, either Sputnik or Sugar Shack, and they'll stay small for you.
Right, and the pollinators love button bush. Jonathan, we're about out of time, but here's another bee question. She says bees. They're building a hive on the fence outside the front door.
Okay. Probably not bees, honeybees. They're going to be in a cavity of some sort, either in a tree or in a wall void if they're in the home at all. This sounds more like maybe a yellow jacket nest. They build a big paper football-sized nest. It could be paper wasps as well. You may want to try and contact a professional to come out and control those for you, or to remove the nest. If you're absolutely positive they're honeybees, a local beekeeper will come and suck those bees up with a vacuum cleaner, take them away and start their own hive. But it sounds more like a social wasp problem.
All right, and Dennis, last critter question
I'll
of
make it
the
quick.
year. Albion, 6 squirrels look like they have a skin disease and they're wasting away. Hair on the tail is thinning.
Yeah, there is a kind of a mange that affects just squirrels when they get overpopulated, so someone might be feeding them too much. And so they get skinny and they get a mange, and it's a natural balance of nature that they won't make it through the winter. And it's just the way nature works. If you get overpopulated, something has to control you.
And it's either the resident hawk or it's
Right.
whatever else is going to keep you from surviving.